Kia ora and welcome back to part two of today's presentation. We got to key importance of Māori models of health and sport and physical activity, and this next part of today's session I really want to look at the Meihana model. I guess firstly, what is the relevance or what is the key importance of Māori models of health and sport and physical activity? It's the cultural relevance. It enhances engagement and participation of Māori. Um, It also helps us as Māori working in this space to be able to utilise things Māori to explain what we're talking about or to create opportunity for others. It's holistic and well-being, or the holistic well-being, the hauora, as we talked about earlier. It emphasises wairua, hinengaro, tinana, whānau. We have this, I guess, common definition of hauora as being those four things because of te whare tapa whā. But as we'll see in the Meihana model, there's a lot more to consider as well. Community empowerment. Ultimately, what it's doing is promoting ownership and cultural relevant solutions. And that's what I love about utilising Māori models of health to look at how we can engage with Māori. And if it's not addressing health disparities, then what's the point of doing it? So ultimately, Māori models of health are all about that, reducing health inequities for Māori, um, making sure that we're actually seeing a change in our lifetime. One of the frustrations for me for years is that while I've been working in the health space, moved from sports into sort of the public health space, the frustration is that I see more Māori statistics getting worse, not better. And I feel like, what are we doing? If I've been on this waka for so long now and we're still seeing these things happening time and time again, how are we really making a difference? And I guess our government has a lot to answer for that. Cultural preservation, ultimately utilising Māori models helps preserve what is ours, revitalises traditional Māori physical activities. And so coming off the part one of today's session to really think about traditional Māori values or traditional Māori activities, traditional Māori ways of doing things, how do we revitalise those? How do we get those back into practice today? And how do we make sure they remain and stay sustainable in our practice? Goodness me. Okay, so let's have a look at ultimately good old Mason Jury's 1984 Te Whare Tapa Whā. We all know this, and I'm pretty sure that if you haven't heard of this before, it's an easy find to really get your head around. It's quite an easy model. The house of four sides, Te Whare Tapa Whā, whare meaning house, the house, tapa, the side, and whā, obviously with a macron on it, is four, the four sides of a house. So to look at this image quite quickly and to recap, we have four sides. We have the hinengaro, our mental, our whānau, our social, our wairua, our spiritual, and our tinana. And I'm not going to go into that much more than to say that this is probably a founding holistic Māori model, and that many people use this to this day in lots of different spaces, which is great. But what I want to talk to us about today is the Meihana model. And Meihana, uh, loosely translated as Mason. And so some people said to me, oh, is this another one of Mason Jury's models? No, it's not. Actually, the lady that created this used to be a Mason before she got married. And so she chose the Meihana model as a framework based on her last name. So developed by a group of Māori medical researchers in 2007, this model has been something I've taught for a long time now, and ultimately is a really big picture model. And it really included a lot of things that people were challenged by the Te Whare Tapa Whā. People say, oh, it's great, you've got the four walls of the house, but you haven't considered the environment. And then Mason Jury went on to create Te Pai Mahutanga that was environmentally inclusive, and I guess the Meihana model had that in mind. That when it was created, there were lots of things to think about, but it specifically came in the space for mental health service delivery, for psychiatrists wanting to work with Māori patients. And so I think this model I've taught in teaching environments for school teachers now, sports. It's a model that can traverse the boundaries of or the silos that we're in, and it really does help us to see the bigger picture of health and well-being. So here's the simplest model and the most modern version of the Meihana model, created by Mihi. You'll see at the bottom left-hand corner there a group from Christchurch that work for the University of Otago, headed by Suzanne Pitama and colleagues. So when we look at this, we quickly see a double-hulled waka in the centre of the screen there. And ultimately, if you're looking at where this waka is heading to, it's the island of Hauora. So I want us to remember as many labels of this model as we possibly can. So let's start with this double-hulled waka heading to the island of Hauora. We've talked about this word already. And as you can see, there are 4 winds blowing towards this waka or around this waka. And the first one is colonisation. Many of us have studied the process of colonisation and its impact it has on health today. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but the next wind is marginalisation. We have racism and we have migration. So I'll leave those winds for now, but I just wanted us to see the bigger picture of the Meihana model. And down the centre, holding the double-hulled waka together, there's a whole bunch of little words there that I can't read, especially without my glasses on, but we're going to unpack that shortly. So to recognise too that the waka has the patient and the whānau in those 2 sides on either side, and they are connected by a bunch of key kupu or values down the middle that we'll learn about shortly. But underneath at the bottom of this picture we have Naromo Moana, the ocean currents, and there are 4 currents also really hard to read in the slide. So let's move along now and unpack these and see them on a bigger scale. So let's start with the waka, and let's put ourselves in this waka as the coach or as the sports professional in this space, along with the athlete and their whānau. And let's look at this waka in itself. We hop in and we get ready to set sail, but we really need to consider these elements holding us together as a team or as a group of people. And so we acknowledge tinana, hinengaro, wairua, taiao, and rātanga hauora. So as a coach, you get in this waka and you think about the physicality of the athlete, their whānau, and yourself. And you think about all the physical things that may be impacting on your waka and the people or the individuals within this waka. So the first part really is to consider the physical well-being of the individuals in the waka. Now, ultimately, when I'm teaching this from a medical space, and we're often presented with patients that are ill, it's quite hard. It's quite simple to recognise that one of the areas that we need to be improving is the physical being of a person. But in this particular case, you might be thinking about the physical. You may have a fighter due to get in the ring shortly, and they've got to lose a couple of kgs to be able to fight in their weight. You may have an area, that the physical being needs supported or extra attention. And so as a coach utilizing this model, you'd be going through this framework and you'd be thinking, okay, how is the physical well-being of my athlete? And in this model, it suggests that you don't just think about the athlete, but you think about their whānau, and you also think about yourself, which is quite different, right? When we often look at analysing our clients or our people we're working with, our teams, we can really focus on them and forget ourselves in the process, and we can really focus on them and forget their whānau in the process. But ultimately, this model suggests that we're not separate. We're all in the waka together, and we all should be thinking about our tinana and how we are all going to be helping to get there. So it's no good having a fantastic coach who's mentally, strategically on game, but has a heart attack halfway through the game and isn't able to really finish the race with you. You need to be on your best as well as a coach. you need to be on your best as a whānau to be able to support, especially elite athletes. But ultimately, even if we were talking about kids' school clubs, thinking about the impact whānau have on being able to get players physically to games, or players physically able, they've had breakfast before they show up. You can unpack this as much as you want. But ultimately, the physical part seems to be the easiest part for many of us to find solutions to. And then we move to Hinengaro and we start to think about the mental well-being, the emotional thinking, and the way in which we really ask questions of our athletes and their whānau around, what are our goals, where are we heading, what's our plan. I might be thinking this as a coach, but you might be thinking something completely different. And how are we on the same page here mentally? What is our game plan? And so again, it's quite straightforward to be thinking about those things and to be asking key questions, making sure that this waka is well balanced and that everybody is pulling their weight. Wairua, for many people, even in Te Whare Tapawhara, as I've taught it for years, seems to be an area that people get a little bit stuck on and thinking, well, I'm not spiritual, or I don't have a faith in a deity or in a higher being. So I don't sure how I would have a question with my clients or my athlete about their spirituality. But again, I guess if we were to look through the history of sports and look at many athletes who practice supporting this area for themselves, you can see their growth and their ability to achieve things at a higher level, based on the fact that they know their wairua is strong, their spiritual side of them is as well, and it's not neglected. So again, to neglect this side, you'll be neglecting the bigger picture of how you can get good health for your athlete. And so I often think about wairua too as more than just karakia or prayers, um, but I also think about the time where I hear a song and it evokes emotion. It may have been when I was 12 and I broke up with my boyfriend at primary school, and I hear that song, that's right, that happened then. Or I hear the national anthem and I think about how that was sung when my daughter was born, and it evokes the memory of her being birthed. There are waiata that lift our spirits, and there are waiata that crush us down, or take us back to memories we don't want to remember again. There are moments with music that I think we can also connect our wairua to. And so thinking about that more broadly, the concept of wairua, it doesn't just look like prayer. It looks like a whole lot of different things for different people. But again, if you're just concentrating on the tinana and you're not thinking about the hinengaro or the wairua, you're going to be missing some really key ways to support your athlete and their whānau. Again, this is a new one, taiao, but to mention that was missed in a lot of other models, or it was definitely missed, I guess, from Te Whare Tapawhā. Taiao meaning our environment. This has been placed in the waka. The environment, not just the environment of the waka we're in currently in this analogy, but the environment of um, home life, the environment of sports life. Whether you spend hours and hours training in a pool, what's the environment? What's the impact of that environment on your body? All these environments that you are training in constantly have a huge impact on your well-being. And so this model suggests that you look at the environment for yourself as a coach, your environment to be able to really connect with your athlete. It suggests you looked at your athlete's environments, and in particular the athlete with their whānau environment. What is that looking like, and how conducive is that to being a really key, healthy athlete? The last thing to consider is rātango hauora. And from this model, it's really talking to the political level, the policy level, or the sort of governance level, the higher level of things. And I think, again, it's really easy to go to the individual and to look at the athlete and the whānau, but the broader determinants, the things that are impacting from a political level right through to what you're able to do as a sportsman, knowing what the drug laws are, knowing what all the laws are if you're travelling internationally, knowing what the local laws say about being able to use certain things and do certain things. So again, this sort of like a deeper area, but to be considering the things that are making it easy for you to get to the island of Hawara. You need to know what's going on within your waka. What are the policies? What are the procedures? What are the things that will actually enhance this waka to be healthy, um, internally healthy? What do we know, and how can we make sure we've covered off all these things? So this is like a needs analysis, really. You could use this as a needs analysis from the get-go. You could be sitting down with your athlete and whānau and going through a whole bunch of key questions about things that are, it may be actually that this person needs a driver's license to be able to get to training in the first place. You could go through this, pulling apart this model and saying, let's have a look at the physical, the mental, the spiritual, the environmental, and the sort of policy procedures, things that are impacting your ability to do this really, really well. And you can come up with some key goals or key solutions for yourself as a coach, for your athlete, and for their whānau if you took it at those 3 levels. So we've got the double hulled waka now. We've really got our heads around what's in this waka, what are the things we need to consider before we even set sail. And I remember when I was a young girl, I used to go sailing every Sunday with my grandfather, and he used to say to me, Anna, I want you to be really strategic today. I don't want you to just get in your boat and try and do it yourself. You need to think about tacking, and making sure that you do it in increments. And that if you go straight out to the buoy, that your first buoy, you're going to see the ocean's just going to pull you over and you're going to get lost. But actually, if you go against the ocean and move with the ocean and this sort of zigzagging form, you will get there. And it might seem like you're going opposite to where the buoy is, but you'll get there a lot quicker. And I originally thought that was ridiculous and didn't listen to my grandfather's advice. And many a time would try and get that, that stretch a little bit straighter towards the buoy, and I'd see myself just floating way off course. So anyone that's sailed or knows what it's like to be on the water will understand the importance of small incremental steps, and understanding the currents and the winds and the impacts they have on your ability to get to your goal or your destination. It's just not as straightforward as jumping in a boat and paddling, or jumping in a boat and sailing. You really need to consider all of the bigger determinants impacting your waka. So in the Meihana model, they talk to the currents as an issue that you really need to consider. The way in which the water will be moving with you or against you. And I often recommend the old Moana Disney cartoon. If you've watched that, when you see Moana jump in her waka and she heads out the first time and the waves just push her back to shore, there's no way she can get over those first waves by the barrier. She just goes out, boom, hits back again. So thinking about how do you strategically get over those bigger waves to get out, and knowing what those currents are like, and when they're the most calm or when they're really whirring around you. But the other thing that I've found in this model is that there can be barriers or they can be enablers. So a wave or a current behind you can be pushing you to the island of Hawara, which is fabulous, but a wave or a current in front of you pushing against you can be, an absolute barrier to you getting to the island of Hawara. So there are 4 key currents in this model that we need to know of. And the first one is ahua. And so when we talk to ahua, we talk to somebody's sort of outward appearance. And tonight, before I got on here to talk to you, I was thinking, all right, I better scrub up, better wash my face and get my ahua looking okay. But what's really interesting is that you have no idea who I am just based on looking at me until I told you that I have Māori whakapapa and I'm married to a Samoan. You didn't know anything about my cultural background until I told you that I had children. You had no idea that I was a parent. Just looking at me, there are a whole lot of things about me that you can't tell, but you often make assumptions based on when you see people that you think you know what kind of person they are. And what's really interesting from a medical perspective is that we have innately judged people without recognizing it. Someone presents himself with an issue and we look at them and go, oh, yeah, you remind me of that last patient that looked exactly like this, and therefore I'm going to treat you the same way. And evidence suggests that a lot of prejudice, racism, you name it, that comes up is because of people's innate ability to make assumptions rather than ask. So, one of the key sort of messages that I want you to take home from this model is that if you meet somebody for the first time, or if you're working with people, even if it's not for the first time and you're still building relationship, one of the best things you can do is remove assumptions and make time to ask questions. So assumptions are seriously the barrier coming against the wave coming against us. The ability to ask is the wave going forward. If you can ask around somebody's well-being, so I guess one of the first questions you want to do when you meet people is ask them about demographics, their name, where they come from, where they feel connected to. And ultimately, from a medical perspective, this is where we recommend people ask about ethnicity. And I guess from a sporting perspective, it is absolutely just as important to know the ethnicity of the person you're working with. And you might say, well, why? Are you going to treat me, are you going to be racist now that you know what ethnic group I identify with? And I'd say, no, I actually just want to be able to give you the best health outcomes. And knowing your ethnicity might determine that. So, from a medical explanation, I often say to my students, we know that Māori have a high prevalence of getting sore throats, strep throat, and actually, if that's not treated with antibiotics, then you could end up with rheumatic fever, which is a heart defect and really quite dangerous. And so that's quite a simple thing to know. Ethnicity, you go, right, Māori patients are more prevalent to getting this than non-Māori. So typically a non-Māori person might present with a sore throat and you'd say, go home, have some water and lie down and have a rest, chill out for a wee while, you'll come right. But with a Māori patient, you'll be like, nope, warning bells. I know that if I gave that advice to this patient, it's not going to be as easy for them to get over it. In fact, I need to be making sure I swab them. I get the antibiotics if the test comes back that they have strep, and I make sure that they get onto it and get that course finished so that it doesn't lead to impacting their heart and them having bigger health issues. So from a medical perspective, asking around ethnicity is crucial to make sure that I determine the right outcome for them. In a sporting sense, I guess we also want to know about ethnicity to be able to make sure we're giving them the best health outcomes too, because I may be overlooking a bunch of things that I haven't considered for Māori are worse or more prevalent for. So again, I guess it's the question of how can I ask this nicely without it being offensive. How do I ask somebody about their ethnicity? Can you tell me which ethnic groups you identify with? Just as you would ask, can you help me pronounce your name? Just as you would ask, could you tell me what your date of birth is? And so I guess when you're starting to collect information like name, date of birth, address, then you throw in the question of ethnicity there and you collect that data so that you can then start to say, actually, I am seeing the same things come up again for my Māori clients. Here's an area that we need to be working on or doing some more research on. If I'm not asking that question, I might overlook something and again, things get away unnoticed. So āhua, don't make assumptions. Don't make assumptions that when I walk in, just because I'm smiling, I'm happy. Don't make assumptions just because I've got a plain, boring face that I'm sad or boring. Get to know me. Ask questions. Ask me how I am. Genuinely ask me. It reminds me of a time once when I was standing in a bakery. Actually, I was just finished a lecture and I walked off to the bakery to grab some lunch. And there were three girls in front of me in line. And one of the girls was like, oh, hi. So one of the other girls, and she says, oh, hi. And she goes, how are you? And she goes, I don't know why you're asking. I know you don't care. And I was like, wow, that was a pretty offensive response, but I was just standing behind listening. And in that moment, I thought what was interesting was we often ask people how they are, or we make assumptions we know how people are. But sometimes we don't even care. We just ask it out of the sake of asking. And so I think if you're going to ask people things, then spend some time to actually hear their answer and learn from them as the context of āhua. Don't make assumptions about somebody based on how they look. Get to know them and ask them good questions. So The second wave that we want to talk to is whānau. And in this model, obviously whānau are already in the waka. We know the whānau that we're talking about with the client or the athlete. But what we need to consider could be a barrier or could be an enabler is if we make the assumption that we know the whānau before we actually do. So we make the assumption that we should be talking to the dad when actually we should be talking to the mum. Or we make the assumption that we've got 15 people here and they should all be involved. But actually we forgot to ask the athlete and they say, no, actually I just want to do this on my own. So what we often do is make assumptions about who should be involved and who shouldn't be involved instead of asking. Again, it's as simple as asking who are the right people to be with you here in this space and who aren't, and what does whānau mean to you. So we also talk to kaupapa whānau and whakapapa whānau. So kaupapa whānau are the people that we have a connection to, relationship to, not necessarily biologically related to, as we would be as whakapapa whānau. But kaupapa whānau are the people that we would die for. You talk about your teammates. They are whānau. They are. They might not be related to you, but you would get in that team and die for one another. To get your gold medal or to get the prize, and you become like siblings, or you become really close as a whānau. So to acknowledge there are two types of whānau that we talk to in this model: kaupapa whānau and whakapapa whānau. We then move on to making sure we don't make assumptions about whenua, where we come from, where we belong. So just because I'm here in Kirikiriroa right now doesn't mean that I actually belong here. And, if you made that assumption, yeah, Anna's Māori and she lives in the Waikato, she must be Tainui Waikato. In actual fact, she's not. She's from Kaitahu. You could absolutely get things culturally wrong for me, or just make assumptions again that are barriers that stop me from getting the needs that I have. So this model suggests that you spend some time asking people where are you from and where do you belong, because that gives people the opportunity to say, well, actually I'm from here, I've been living here for the last 6 months, but I feel like I belong here, or actually I belong where my whānau are, or actually I've got no connection to anywhere right now, I'm feeling a bit displaced. So this model asks that you ask questions around belonging and places rather than making assumptions. And the last thing, or the last wave that we need to consider, or current, is tikanga. And if we look at this word tikanga, tika, to make things right or to do the right thing. So tikanga essentially is, what is the right way to do things? And again, I would recommend the right way would be to ask, not make assumptions. But in this particular area, it's asking, ask the athlete, what's the right way? How is the right way that we can do this? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? Instead of going in there and just doing what you've always done, culturally, how can I do this differently? What works and what doesn't work? So if I go in and train you the way that I've always trained everybody else, but I haven't acknowledged your culture and the way you behave, or your values, or the things that you've had ingrained in you, then I may be really mucking things up for both you and your culture or your identity. So checking in, what is the right way to do things? So all of these things here, currents, ahua, whānau, whenua and tikanga, can easily be combated or can easily be removed or can easily become the wave behind us instead of in front of us if we simply ask. So my next slide says, don't make assumptions, ask. How do you know? You ask. So again, this is a crucial part of the Meihana model. That really, we had the first part that we could use as a needs assessment, but we also have 4 key areas we could be asking good questions around, asking key questions around, your identity, who you are, who you identify as. I could be asking key questions around your whānau, who's important to you within your whānau. Where are you from? Those are the kinds of questions that might matter to people. Where do you feel you belong? And lastly, what's the right way to work with you? 4 simple steps, 4 very key things that you could do to engage with your athlete, your client, and their whānau, to ask them broadly to their whānau as well. So I'm moving along now. The last part of this model that I really want to address, there is other parts. Obviously, there's the sales, to think about the navigation of the sales, but I just want to touch on the 4 wins. Um, and I've got here as kaiko, but actually as coaches, what do you know about the broader determinants impacting your student, your client, your athlete, and their whānau? And the model suggests that there are 4 things that we should be looking at. So we're going to start with marginalisation, and quite simply, marginalisation is the minority or the marginalised group. And so to be thinking about the history of Māori from the process of colonisation or from migration, colonisation, we have this concept of marginalisation where you look at minority group and we think about how do we make sure Māori are at the centre of all things that we do and acknowledge this. How do we make sure that what I'm trying to do with this waka and getting it to the island of Hawara is not pushing them out to the side again or increasing the gap in statistics or reducing their ability to do what they do as Māori, is removing their autonomy. I want to be able to give them um, the voice and the ability to be themselves in this space. And when I often think about marginalisation, I think of a time where I was at a board meeting. I was late for a meeting, and there was a full table of people. It was a big, big boardroom, and everybody seemed to be sitting in quite comfortable spaces when I arrived. And typically when somebody new comes to the group, you'd move over, you'd shuffle over and say, "Oh, pull your chair in here and make some space." But nobody did on this occasion. Everybody continued as they were, and I found a seat in the corner of the room with another colleague who happened to be Māori. The two of us were sitting in the corner on 2 separate chairs, not connected to the table in any way. And partway through that meeting, there was somebody who says, "Oh, isn't this a Hawara Māori conversation to be had? Shouldn't we ask some, where's the Māori staff?" And I said, "We're over here in the corner, marginalised." And everyone went quiet. But it was really obvious that, we talk about Māori not being at the table. We talk about Māori not having a voice, marginalised group of people that are minority group in New Zealand. And this example was, again, well, we know we need to talk to things Māori, but we haven't even invited you to the table. So this broader determinant is really for us to consider how many Māori are at the table making decisions on behalf of other Māori, and if they're not at the table, then how do we get them there? So this is not something you'd directly be working with your athlete on, specifically saying, "Oh, so you're feeling marginalised at the moment." You wouldn't be doing that, but you would be thinking, actually, how much Māori representation is in the sport already, and how do we get more Māori representation there, and how do I ask for Māori voice so that my athlete is safe to be Māori in this sport? So it's a bigger picture determinant to be considering, as is migration. And ultimately, unpacking migration means that you begin to think about the sort of transient lifestyle of Māori before we were colonised, but also to think to once we were colonised, how many people moved from rural areas to cities to look for income, to look for work. When Māori soldiers returned from war, the land had changed or been given away, and many sought jobs in the city. And so the story of migration in our short history in New Zealand has had a huge impact on our health as Māori, and is something to be considered when working with Māori athletes and their whānau. So again, if you are taking people away from their norm and migrating them into a new space, how do you make that space safe culturally for their identity? And what do you know about the history of New Zealand, and making sure that it doesn't repeat in the future of what you're doing when working with Māori? The process of colonisation, I think many of us have come across this, and we can talk to colonisation in lots of different spaces, and not just historically, but today. What does colonisation look like? It looks like them are one main group making decisions on behalf of everybody else, and so therefore we're a colonised nation, and we still have colonised leadership in this country, which means that we have marginalisation and migration and and racism as an effect of colonisation. So good to really understand. What I often talk to students about in this space is, understanding colonisation post before, the history of colonisation before our lifetime and what colonisation means to us in our lifetime. And I think about Anzac Day. I had a student challenge me years ago saying, it's talking about all this history of Aotearoa and all the things that happened to Māori. I wasn't there. It's not my problem. Wasn't my fight. And I think, yep, that's a fair call. I wasn't there either. I'm not here to judge you or your ancestors or to put blame on anyone. But what I was able to highlight was Anzac Day was coming up. And I said, you know what, I wasn't there. I didn't fight in Anzac. I wasn't part of that war. Um, so, do I just not worry about it? Do I just scrap it? Do I just move on? And you could hear the crowd going, no, because, we're all about to get up and acknowledge our ancestors that fought for our freedom in this country. The least we forget is the motto of Anzac Day. Now, I think it's a really fantastic motto to be considering with colonisation as well. Least we forget. The reason we remember the war and remember those that fought for us is so that we ensure that it doesn't happen again in our lifetime, or that we acknowledge the freedom we had from that fight. So I guess the process of colonisation and the waves of things that have occurred is really good for us to be aware of what's happened before us, so we don't become apathetic or a little bit like comfortable in who we are. But we see actually these things are still impacting on us today, both Māori and non-Māori in this country, and we have a responsibility to ensure it doesn't continue or perpetuate into the future. So colonisation, it's a big one, but I think quite simply put, it's an area that we can address as a country together. Racism, I think, has a lot to answer for many of these things, and it often seems to be the win that people go, oh, it's a bit awkward. How do we talk about racism? Again, I'm not asking you to talk to your athlete and their whānau specifically about racism. I'm asking you to be aware that racism occurs, and you may see it in the club rooms, or you may see it in the dance room, or wherever you may be, whatever you're doing. You may see racism and be thinking, oh, flip, that was a racist experience, but how do I help that person, or how do I change that? And unless you know what racism is, it's often quite situations, it's really hard to pinpoint how you actually fix it. So I am not going to explain it in depth myself, because I really like this a video that tells a much better story of racism than I can. So let's watch this for a few minutes, if it lets me. Come on now. Doesn't want to let me. Of course it doesn't. I'm really sorry. I have tried to get that to play a number of times while I'm recording, and it doesn't want to do its thing. So I'm going to leave that one, the link for you to be able to watch The Gardener. And it would be really cool that you watch it before you come to the workshop next week, so I can test whether you actually watch this recording. Okay, so quite simply, there are three types of racism, and I want you to be able to talk to those when you come to my workshop and we meet face to face soon. Unfortunately, I can't get that to play right now. So I just want to go back to the bigger picture of our model, just quickly. Back to here, thinking about this bigger picture of our model. What we've talked about today are the strands that hold our waka together, our client, our athlete, their whānau, and ourselves in the waka, connected together by Wairoa whānau, Wairoa Hinengaro and Tinana, Taiao and Rātanga Hauora. These key things keeping our waka together are a form of needs assessment, or an assessment, And then we've got the four winds around us blowing. That they are the winds that we're not necessarily addressing with our athlete, but we may be. But again, if we're ignoring them and they're impacting our ability to get to the island of Hawara, we need to consider them. And so don't bury your head in the sand when you know someone's suffering from racist attacks. Think about how you can challenge them. Don't bury your head in the sand and continue to perpetuate colonisation, marginalisation, migration. Actually, think about how we can change things, how we can do things better. We've also got those currents that we talk to. We've got ahua, our outwardly appearance, our whānau, our whenua, and our tikanga. And all of those are driven by our ability to ask good questions or to not ask and see barriers come up against us. So our biggest goal is to get this waka to the island of Hawara, and I think that should be a really good overview of the Meihana model for today. So in my slides, I've also got a glossary of the key kupu Māori that I use in this session today for some of you who maybe aren't Māori, like Anna, I don't even know what you're on about. It's quite simple really to be able to search Māori kupu today, Māori words, but here's a list for them for anyone that needs them. And I've also attached the resources. So the Gardener's Tale is this resource that I really want you to have a look at. There's a copy of the Meihana model of the clinical assessment framework by Suzanne Pitamo and Co. And there's also the Māori Standards of Health. This is a book that I kind of talk to as the Bible for me and Hawara Māori. But this was the last study, collated study, evidence around Māori health issues. And so it's a standalone book that you can get your hands on that talks to all the health issues and collected as a book back in 2005. Today, the data is still collected, but not as a book, and it's seen in lots of different places and spaces. What's interesting when you put it all in a book and you can see it all is that unfortunately, many of those health statistics haven't improved since 2005. So I often say go back to these health issues here and have a look at how we can be improving them in our lifetime and what's going on in our lifetime. So the last part of my session today is the importance of cultural competency in sports psychology. And there is so much to unpack in here, but understanding diverse perspectives is just one thing you can do as a practitioner. And ultimately, Māori models of health when working with Māori are a fantastic way to see different perspectives. Building rapport, that's a very Pākehā way of talking to having whakawhanaungatanga from a Māori cultural perspective. We talk about connecting through whenua, through reo, through our language, and through whānau, whereas rapport can be about the weather or who won the rugby game in the weekend. So building rapport is wonderful, but actually connecting with people over their place where they come from, their family, and their languages is even deeper way of making relationships and being culturally competent. We can tailor interventions, so start to really think about how we can create interventions of change for people. We can address health disparities. Ultimately, everything we're doing should be doing that. And so don't just tick along playing the sports that you've always loved playing, but really think about how you can be shifting that, how you can be improving that for Māori or for minority groups in Aotearoa New Zealand. And foster inclusivity. Obviously, I'm all about inclusivity from an able-bodied person living an abled life. I want to think about people that aren't as able as me and how I can ensure that they are getting every opportunity in life that they deserve as well. So how do we foster that in our approaches? What are we doing to support diversity into sports today? And the last one is to enhance ethical practice. So I've got links here to different readings in this PowerPoint for you to be able to look at. But that brings me to really the end of my session today. Had this been in a workshop setting, I would be definitely talking more, or a lecture setting, asking more questions of you. I hope you take the time to pause, reflect on what I've talked about today, and when we get together in workshops next week, we'll unpack this some more and really think about enhancing our perspectives, building our relationships, creating interventions of change, improving disparities, and fostering inclusivity, and doing this in an ethical, practical way. Ngā mihi koutou mā, I really appreciate you watching this recording and I look forward to seeing you at our workshops. Ka kite.